You mentioned workers' rights as something you wanted to stand up for, but do you have a short to-do list if you're elected as to what you want to do when you become Attorney General?
Day one, workers' rights is coming front and center. Let me go back in time a little bit. When I was prosecuting attorney of Cass County for a 10-year period between 1994 and 2004, we made prosecuting prevailing wage violations a top priority. Prevailing wage, which is a violation that occurs when an employer underpays an employee because perhaps he's an undocumented worker, or he is not part of a protected class of workers, such as a member of a union, and essentially underpays him by 50%, 75%. The employer is essentially stealing money out of the pocket of the worker. Okay, it's a criminal law violation to do that in the state of Missouri. We clamped down on prevailing wage violations in Cass County to a greater degree than any prosecutor, Democrat or Republican, had ever prosecuted this crime anywhere in Missouri. And my belief has been that an attorney general that throws his shoulder into the wheel of this crime and from border to border says to the employer community that you are not going to steal out of the pockets of Missouri workers can rid the state of Missouri of prevailing wage violations in the same way I was able to rid Cass County of prevailing wage violations during the 1990s. And so my belief is that workers' rights, the time has come for workers' rights to be brought front and center in this state. And I want this next Attorney General's office to be the office that stands at the forefront of that movement.
Maybe you've already talked about it with workers' rights, but what is the biggest or most important issue facing the next Attorney General here in Missouri?
The answer to that is Medicaid fraud. Medicaid has been an enormous issue, as you well know, in the state of Missouri over the last 4 years. The Medicaid cuts of 2005 pushed a number of people out, 100,000 people or more out of the system. And then the Republicans had made a promise that they would rebuild the system in coming years once the budget healed, but that promise went unfulfilled. Medicaid fraud is the situation that exists where contractors to the state's Medicaid system are stealing money out of the treasury of the state of Missouri. Medicaid is a $6 billion a year program operated by the government of this state, and as much as 10% of that, or $600 million, is stolen by unscrupulous contractors to the Medicaid program. Now let's proportion for a second what $600 million really is. $600 million is an amount of money that is stolen every year that could operate the University of Missouri, all 4 campuses, Kansas City, Columbia, UMSL, Rolla, that could support all 4 campuses for a period of 15 months. That is the greatest theft that is going on in the state of Missouri today. And the next Attorney General's office is going to focus its attention, its investigative resources, and its prosecutorial power on moving those civil cases forward and recouping that money, and then taking the money and moving it back into the state's health care system so that we can authentically rebuild the cuts that we endured years ago.
How do you do that, as you say, move the money back into the system from where it's going?
Well, what happens is there are a team of investigators that will review the bills that are submitted to the Medicaid program to look for irregularities. Sometimes cases emanate from that research. In 2007, I also passed a piece of legislation called the Medicaid Fraud Act of 2007 that incents whistleblowers who are essentially employees of these unscrupulous companies. They may see some irregularity going on in a home health care business, for example. They may know of overbilling or work that is not actually being done but is being charged for. And what it does is it incents these people to come forward and report the crimes, really for the first time, and get compensation for it, become part of the civil case. And the hope is that we can draw these claimants out, or we can draw these claims out by alerting the worker population who see it happening on the ground to report this wrongdoing to the state of Missouri.
All right, is there anything I haven't asked you about during this interview that you would like to discuss?
No, I think that The main thing that we have to offer the people of the state is an experienced prosecutor who has stood in the wells of the courtrooms of this state over a decade and made the closing arguments on behalf of our people. An attorney general is the voice that stands in the courtrooms of this state and makes these closing arguments. What I have to offer is the experience of someone who's done it over his entire life, who's been an authentic member of the law enforcement community. My opponent has, to my knowledge, never even tried a jury trial, never stood in front of 12 people and argued a case. If you want to be the state's top law enforcement officer, if you want to train trial attorneys, you should have spent some part of your life doing it authentically. And that's what it takes to build a great Attorney General's office in Missouri.
Thank you very much for joining me today in the studio. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.